polling sites that couldn't close until after 8 o'clock because the lines were backed up. And I think this goes to my prior comment that the machines were new and they're actually poorly designed so that there is a single page for each race, unless, of course, there's too many candidates, in which there's 2 pages for each race. And if there's 30 races to go through, you end up clicking on 70 or 80 different things before you're finally done voting. And so this took some voters a long period of time, and it caused a lot of backup. But the big delay was in reporting. And so I talked to the election commissioner, Roni Metzger, and his explanation was that the pulling of the data from the voting machines and the tabulation machines into their election reporting system was fine. They were able to get it in there. But then this new software that they had used from ES&S was incredibly slow, surprisingly slow. So after getting the data in and asking to generate a report, it was taking on the order of hours to generate a report, and they had to do this several times during the night to, pull all the data in. And so it was until 7:50 in the morning Central Time that they finally were able to report results, and that's 10 to 13 hours longer than it should have been. And this is a problem. It was new software. And these are literally the first use of these machines anywhere in the country. And so I think they were, knowing what I know about testing software and hardware is you don't field test something in a high visibility, high volume situation without running it in a smaller mode first. And Johnson County's primary is probably one of the biggest single county primaries in the country. And so they had well over 1,000 of these new machines being used for the first time. And so this was the first time the software saw all of these issues. And clearly there was a problem. The company has taken responsibility for it and swears it will be fixed. But we need to make absolutely sure that this is tested, far ahead of the general election so that we don't have this problem again.
Is there anything else that you would like to make sure that we talk about?
I think that one of the challenges for Kansas has been about growing business in Kansas. And, the Brownback experiment was, well, if we lower taxes, all these businesses will come and invest in the state. And, we've had several years to look at the data, and this simply has not occurred. But there are opportunities to grow Kansas businesses by making them more successful in their early days. And this is really the fact that, all new job growth, whether it's in Kansas or in the country, is entirely dependent on the creation of new businesses. Mm-hmm. So I think that we can do better as a state, allowing startups to grow. And I know a lot about what makes startups fail and succeed. And sometimes it's just, a bad business plan. But a lot of the other times it's just mechanical. And if we can help some of these businesses get through, education about some of the mechanical failures, we can grow business in Kansas. And I think I really want to focus on that so we can have job growth in Kansas and jobs for our children.
Excellent. Well, if our listeners are convinced that we need a new Secretary of State in Kansas who's a Democrat, well, there'll be a new Secretary of State in Kansas regardless, but that you are the right fit for the job, how can they go about supporting your campaign?
Well, my website's www.bamforkansas.com, BAM, the number 4, Kansas.com. And, we are looking for contributions. We are very active in our social media. So if you could follow us on Facebook and share with your Kansas friends, both, Democrats and Republicans, and especially the unaffiliated, because that's a big part of the Kansas voter base. Get the word out. It is a down ballot race, but, as you said, this year, the Secretary of State for Kansas is going to have a lot of eyes focused on it. And I don't think we'll just, be hidden under the governor's race. I think we'll be right up there with them.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This has been really great, and I'm really excited about this race. I've been excited ever since I realized that Chris Kobach wasn't going to be Secretary of State any longer, but I was especially excited to see such a great candidate.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm on in this segment with Jena Griswold, who is running for Secretary of State in Colorado. Hi, Jena.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for inviting me to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. So I have been looking a lot at Secretary of State's races around the country, and we've talked to a couple of people who are running already, Heather Milam in Alabama and Jim Harper in Indiana. And so these are races that I think are so important and so overlooked. So I'm really excited to speak with you. So we'll jump into some of why that is. But maybe to start, you could tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to run for Secretary of State.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a town up in the mountains in Colorado. It's called Estes Park. And I grew up really working class. So I actually started working the summer after 7th grade because my mom, when we were younger, was really the breadwinner and sometimes in 1-2 jobs. I still sometimes have to go to food banks. So I help out. She never said, Jenna, go get a job. But I just saw how hard she's working. So I wanted to be able to pay for some of my own and started working after 6th grade. And at the end of the day, I'm really glad that I did. I saw that a lot of Coloradans were working on too hard and struggling to get by. And that really inspired me to be the first person in my family to go to a 4-year college and then to law school because I wanted to help even the playing field in Colorado. So, the road to get to this point was definitely winding. I didn't even know what the Secretary of State was when I was younger. And I started to practice law. I was practicing international anti-corruption law. And how I learned about the Secretary of State is that I actually served as an attorney in 2012 protecting people's voting rights in Colorado. When we had, a Secretary of State that everybody happens to remember in Colorado, and that was Scott Gessler, who was really actively putting up barriers to the franchise. So, he sent out letters to thousands of Coloradans saying, hey, come prove your citizenship, which were really just on a bogus basis. He also did something that I really disagreed with. So if you hadn't voted previous general election, he put you on an inactive status and you wouldn't receive your mail-in ballot. But they did not know they wouldn't receive their mail-in ballot. And on top of that, in 2012 in Colorado, our election system actually went down on Election Day, stopping all voting for time in Colorado. So, I guess seeing those actions were very eye-opening. They're very eye-opening, and I feel the power of the Secretary in a negative way. Because I believe the Secretary is uniquely positioned to protect people's votes and, at the end of the day, democracy. So, I ran the federal portfolio in the state of Colorado for a couple of years. I worked on our federal issues in D.C. There was a big flood that hit in 2013. We were out of communication with my mom for 5 days. And it was just this tremendous natural disaster that happened in Colorado. As the D.C. office director, I was able to work with the congressional administration and the Obama administration and help bring back more than $1 billion flood relief. And I just love serving the state. But I wanted to come home, and I opened up my own practice. And I've been thinking about this office for a while and the real good we can do to increase the franchise by having secretaries of state dedicated to our constitutional right to vote, dedicated to securing our elections. I decided to announce my candidacy actually when our Secretary of State in Colorado sent all of our voter data to the Trump Vote Commission, which caused thousands of Coloradans to cancel their voter registration, a decision that I really disagreed with.
I think of Colorado as a blue, maybe bluish purple kind of state, and I was surprised to see that there is a Republican Secretary of State in Colorado right now. And I think that's true in a lot of states that I unexpectedly have found Republican secretaries of state. Do you see a reason for that? Do you think that has been sort of a deliberate ploy of Republicans to get into these important positions that fly under the radar? What do you think has been going on there?
Well, so Colorado, we are still a swing state. So you can remember back, I think it was 20 years ago, the governor's race was decided by 5,300 votes. So we are really a swing state, and our statewide elections are not on the same year as presidential. So historically, we have not had the down ballot statewide seats in Colorado. In Colorado, we have 4 statewide executive offices, all independent of each other. The governor, treasurer, the attorney general, and the secretary of state. And we generally have not held the treasurer, the attorney general seat, or the secretary of state. We're in a unique position to actually win this race in Colorado for secretary for the first time in 60 years. I think, so it's such an honor to be the Democrat, and I plan to flip this seat for the first time in decades. Besides that, I'm actually the only woman nominated to statewide executive office, a Republican Party or Democratic Party. We've never had a Democratic woman Secretary of State, which is also exciting. To answer your question, I think there's 2 reasons that we tend in the past to not have Democrats sitting in the Secretary of State seat. First and foremost is because the races are not on presidential year, you have low Democratic turnout in midterm elections historically in Colorado. And when you're in a state where it's a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third unaffiliated, turnout really matters. Second, Colorado is a big state. We have 64 counties, and you have to communicate across the entire state. And historically, candidates wouldn't raise all that much money for these seats. So it was a huge impediment to be able to communicate statewide. But third, yes, I think to your point, conservatives have really understood the power of the Secretary of State seat. If you oversee elections and finance, you have a double or triple effect. You can affect every single race, every single policy. So I do believe that there's a more focused approach to these seats on the Republican side than the Democratic side. But I think there's definitely a lot of energy this year to take these seats. And we definitely have a path to win, which is just so exciting on various levels. But the most exciting thing is all the great policy we can do to make sure that every eligible person in Colorado, every eligible citizen, whether stated or Democrat, when they go and cast their vote, they're able to do so, and then the elections are the securest in the nation.
Yeah, so you said that you think this is definitely a seat that can be flipped, and the primary results would tend to bear that out. So you and the Republican incumbent were both unopposed in the primary, but you got nearly 100,000 more votes than he did.
That's right.
Are you seeing that kind of energy on the ground? Does it seem like Democrats are really excited and will be turning out in larger numbers this year?
I sure think so. So, and to clarify, one point where I was in a 4-way primary, but 2 of my opponents, Democratic opponents, dropped out before we went through the caucus system. And so there's 2 ways to get onto the primary ballot in Colorado. One is through petitioning, which is collecting signatures, and the other way is through the caucus system. So I actually was opposed through the caucus system, but won the nomination outright at Assembly, which is the last step of the caucus system, with 98.2% of the vote. So I was unopposed on the primary ballot itself. Not only did I outperform the Republican incumbent who has been in an elected office for decades by 96,000 votes, I was the top vote getter of any statewide candidate in Colorado. And I think there's a lot of energy. There's so much energy on the ground. We have over 600 volunteers for our Secretary of State race. We have people really dedicated who understand that the power of in protecting our democracy without them. We're also really focused on, I'm focused on doing everything I can do. So we're traveling around the state, talking with people, breaking fundraising records. And, I don't come from money at all. I don't come from money, but we're breaking all fundraising records in the past that we've seen in this race, which to communicate across the state, because it's so expensive to communicate. So we are seeing a lot of energy among Democrats, but also unaffiliated. So in Colorado, in the primary, unaffiliated, which make up about a third of our population, went about 6% towards the Democratic ballot because we had unaffiliated could vote in primaries in Colorado in 2018. So there is a lot of energy, and I hope it keeps up. I'm very optimistic it keeps up all the way to November.
You also have a lot of endorsements, including some very high-profile endorsements from Vice President Joe Biden and President Barack Obama. Can you talk a little bit about the endorsements you've received and what that means to a campaign like yours?
Well, I think, look,